Hello, I'm Shauna Robeson, and welcome to another episode of Healing Art After Hours, where I upload videos of live Zoom creative workshops from my Healing Art Happy Hour meetups. You can join and participate at the link below. In today's video, I will be continuing to demonstrate coloring tools and techniques with a variety of colored pencils, including Prismacolor Premier, Faber, Castell, Albrecht, Durer Watercolor, and Derwent Inktense. And I'm just going to be doing some little small demonstrations using these cute little guys for the holidays, for holiday cards. So join us and have fun. Handouts for the introduction to this topic are available for download at my shop at creatingspacecoastal.com, and also the link will be below for that in the description. And happy coloring. Enjoy. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is what I'm going to be doing tonight. I'm going to be starting with continuing to color these simple little projects. I just wanted to do a sampler of each of the different mediums that I have, just so you kind of get an idea and be able to walk you through some of the pros and cons, or just maybe some tips. I made them a little bigger. So these are the smaller ones, and this was the polychromos. And I'm going to show you something with that in a minute. But tonight I'm going to start with the Prismacolor pencils. And so I wanted to just start with showing you how I store them. So I use these pencil organizers, which are between $20 and $30 on Amazon. And I think they're really handy because I can organize them by color, and I actually organize them by triads of color, like I was mentioning last time, where I know which pencils go together in color families. So that's how I organize them. It does take time to get it that way, but I'll tell you what, when I'm actually doing a project, it's so much quicker to get to my project and find what I need. So I have these little color swatches in here, and the template for those are in the notes for this month. So check that out. But this is I think this was 150. So this is a big, I have a lot of colors in these Prismas, which I don't have in the polychromos because they, there's the cost point there. But I just wanted to show you that. And then, the other thing I want to show you is when I use a color in a project, so I can look at my swatch and say, okay, what color theme do I want for this? I want, I'm going to just do it as we speak. I want these three colors because I like to have three of each, whatever color I'm doing, if I have them, because I like to create some contrast. One, it can be two or three, it doesn't have to be three, but I like to have more than one. This is a nice red too. And then, so I'm going to continue doing the red and green. So I'm going to go ahead and look for my green palette. I think I want this bright, maybe this bright green. Yeah, I like that kind of limey green. So I'm going to just take these three. They're all put together. So look how quickly I was able to find the colors I wanted. And then I know I'm going to do some gray for the white part. And I want kind of a cooler gray. So, and sometimes the color that the pencils are doesn't match real well with the color that the actual pigment is. So that's another good reason to make these swatch sheets, because you can't always follow that by just looking at them. And you don't want to be surprised once you put it on the paper. Okay, so 1067, and I have all the numbers written in there. I think I'm going to take 4 colors because, okay, so those are the grays. I'm also going to take my blender. It's just a basically colorless pencil. This one is, I think, a wax-based one that's a different brand, but I just happen to have it in my stash, and I did try it out with both the polychromos and these, and it works. So I'm going to have that out, and I'm going to also take my white pencil out. So that's what I'm going to have out and ready to go for now. Now, when I want to put this away, but I still want to work on it, what I do is I just switch the direction of the pencils. So the pencils normally have the leads going this way, and I just switch it going that way so that if I want to go back to this project later, I don't have to remember which colors I had. Another way you can do it is just write down the colors that you use, with the project. So maybe on the back of this, I could write down, these are the colors, the greens, and then I can write them all down. But this was a little bit, for me, just a quicker way. I just pull them all out, and then I can, because I tend to use a lot of colors because I do the triads. So, okay. So those are the colors that I want to do. And like I said, I'm going to do it on the bigger page. A lot of the technique that I do with the polychromos would be the same as the Prismacolor. It's just they behave differently. And that's true of whether you have the dollar store pencils or not. It's still the same techniques. It's just that the behavior of the materials might not be the same as a different pencil. So one thing I wanted to show you is that I was trying out the alcohol as a solvent. It does work with wax-based pencils, and I think that's the safest, solvent that you can use because a lot of it's the odorless mineral spirits or turpentine and that sort of thing, and that's chemical based, and it's not really healthy to breathe. So I tried out alcohol. I knew it worked well for wax pencils, but it works for crayons. So anything wax based, because wax has an alcohol component of the chemical base. So it'll break that down and make smaller particles. So I tried it on this oil based, which is the polychromos, and it actually worked for that too. It can lift a little bit of the pigment as well. So just be cautious with it. How I do it is I just put a little bit in a cap. And I use a deep cap because it won't evaporate as quickly, because for the water, I might use a flat cap like this, but the alcohol evaporates very quickly. So this, I think, helps it keep it from evaporating as quickly. And I just use a little Q-tip. You can also use a blending stump. You can dip it in. If you want more details, you could dip the tip in. Just make sure that you have all the pigment shaved off of that with some sandpaper. That's how you get rid of the color from a previous project. But this works perfectly fine. So you just dip it in the alcohol, and you don't want it real like dripping wet. You just want to have enough of it on there. And then it just, now this is the smaller one, so it's going to be a little bit, it's not quite as, there we go. Can bring it in. But you see how you can see these brush strokes here, or maybe there's a little bit of white, that I didn't maybe burnish it in with the pencil. So I can take the alcohol, and this will just soften those strokes a little bit. Like I said, it can lift it a little bit, so you have to be careful. But it just will smooth out the strokes. It works best when you have a good layer down. So if you only have one layer, it might not work quite as well. But if you have at least a couple strokes on, it's going to do some nice softening of that. So I don't know if you could notice that, but it just basically softens those pencil strokes, and it basically makes the particles smaller so they fit in the valleys of the tooth of the paper. As I talked about in the first Friday, the paper has tooth. It basically is fibrous. So it has these little peaks and the little valleys. And when the particles are big, like waxy particles that hold the pigment, if they're big, they sit on top of the tooth, but they don't go into the valleys. And so it creates a lot of white of the paper showing, because you're seeing the white of the paper under the valley. So to address that, you can use the solvent or burnishing techniques to kind of push it in or flatten the tooth down, and that'll help make it just more of an even color. Okay, so enough chemistry. All right, let's get to these pencils. Now you'll notice that my printer is acting weird. It's doing weird things. So it's not printing everything that I want. for some reason. It's getting old. I mean, it's pretty old. So if you do print off a color page or something and you get a weird something like that, you can just take a Sharpie or some indelible ink and fill it in. This one's kind of dry. Let me get a juicier one. So just repair it with a black marker. Voila. Okay. I've got some shine, but see, then it just takes out. And if you need to, you can, if it looks a lot different than the other black, you can fill in that with the marker too. But all right, let's get started. So
Donna, what kind of pencils were those that you used the rubbing alcohol on?
those were the polychromos.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and they also will work on these Prismacolor, any of the typical wax-based pencils that'll work on. And one tip to get good coverage is to have a sharp pencil. The duller the pencil, the harder it's going to be to get in those little spaces, and you're going to get a lot more white space showing through. It's again that tooth thing. You're going to not fit between the tooth with your pigment. So just getting it sharpened real good. This is one of my favorite sharpeners. It has different size openings. It's travelable. You just pop this side to clean it on both sides, and then you open this side to get your 3 sizes. Just hold it real still and then move the pencil. And what I also like about it is it doesn't do the really long sharpen where it takes your whole pencil apart. Like, see how long this distance is? Some pencil sharpeners give you this really long tapered, and that just, I think, takes more of the pigment. So I like that this one has a shorter sharpening.
What was the name of that? And also, was the alcohol just plain old rubbing alcohol?
Yeah, just plain old rubbing alcohol.
Okay, and the name of the sharpener you have?
Yeah, this is a Faber Castell.
Okay, thanks.
This is another good one, but I don't know the name of it, but it's really nice quality. It's a heavy duty sharpener made in Germany, but unfortunately it doesn't say what it is, and I can't remember the name of where I got it. But if you see one like that that says made in Germany, it's a good solid heavy duty one. The thing about that though is it doesn't catch the shavings, so you have to make sure to have another container. Okay, so starting with a sharp pencil. This one didn't sharpen real wood. Good. And you need to clean them out too. Sometimes to clean them out, you can sharpen a regular pencil, just a regular graphite pencil, and that'll clear out some of the wax buildup. So if you start to find that it's not, that it's feeling like it's clogged, I feel like this might be getting clogged. It could be full too. I may need to empty that, but anyway, this one's not sharpening as well. So I'm going to start with my areas that I want red with my lightest color. And again, you can use different strokes. And for the small areas, I just do the scumbling, just the little circular motion, and I just get a smooth. Now you could do hatching and cross hatching, which looks like this is hatching, which you just do. You do one stroke, you lift, and then you do another stroke, and you keep lifting, and you just do one movement. And then cross hatching would be going across the other way. And you can get some interesting texture by doing it that way. So if you were trying to make it look like fabric or something like that, you could use that technique, and you can use that for shading and whatnot. You can also, if you zigzag, if you go back and forth, that's another way where you keep the pencil on the page and go back and forth. That's one way. Or scumbling is like just little circular. And I find that with the circular, you just don't get more of a the pencil stroke patterns. So depending on what I'm trying to do, it might make sense to have those pencil patterns going a certain way. But if I'm just trying to do something that's maybe a soft fabric, I don't want it to have a pattern, a directional pattern. So I'm just doing this little lightly. Don't push hard on the paper, or else you push down the tooth and then you lose all those fibers to catch the pigment. So just make sure to just start off lightly and just take some patience. And then I'm going with my next darker color. I want to go this a little bit further over. Now, after I've laid down the 3 colors or 2 colors, whatever it is, now I'm going down with my darker color, my darkest color. Okay. And I just want that right at the edge, because I'm thinking, it's going around and there's a little bit of a shadow there. As it curves around, it's moving away from you, so it's a little darker. And then I can go in and do blending with the lightest color. So after I've laid down all 3 colors, I can blend it out so that I get a really nice gradient of the colors. I think I want to put little rosy cheeks. I don't know why that came to mind, but they're kind of high, but I just thought that would be cute. Okay. And this is a very soft lead pencil, the Prismacolors, which lay down really nice. I mean, I don't have to put a lot of pressure. I get a lot of pigment down, but they do get dull a lot quicker than, say, the polychromos, which is a firmer lead. And so you have to sharpen them more frequently if you want that sharp point. One way to help keep your pencil sharpened longer, usable longer, is to keep rotating it as you're using it, so that you're keeping, you're working with the sharpest edge. Now in this case, I'm doing kind of the zigzags because it's a bigger space, and I don't mind because this fabric's going down. So I'm just going with the grain of the fabric, and I'm just sort of zigzagging, doing a zigzag motion. And I'm going all over with this first layer because it's very, very light pigment. So even if there's points where I want it really light, it's okay. It's gonna still look like a highlight because it's just just so pale. So it's okay to put it all over. Now I could just keep layering this color, and as I do, it's going to get darker too. So if I just wanted to use 2 colors, that's still going to give me some depth, some contrast. It's just, you get more with, if you go even darker. Now I could, instead of doing a darker color of red, I could do a shadow color, like the contrast color, like I like to use indigo as a shadow color, like I talked about last time. Or I could do green to make it kind of the opposite, right? The complementary color that makes it kind of gray. So I could do that. And I'm putting the color kind of around the edges because I'm just thinking that it's fabric and it's sort of maybe rounded a little bit. So the edges are receding. So I'm just giving that effect by making them a little bit darker. So there's two things. There's going to be the receding area of it, and then there's also the shadow, which are two separate things. Where the fabrics overlap, there's going to be kind of a shadow underneath that. All right, now I can take the darkest color and go where I want the richest color to be. And even if you don't follow any kind of physics of the shape of something, just having some multi-cut, like if you don't even know where to put it, just having some different colors and different shades and different contrast is going to add to the depth of your project. So right now I'm going back with the lightest color and sort of blending those colors together to kind of smooth that out. I'm pushing a little bit firmer this time. And see how that just, see how that just smooths out that whole thing and it just blends it. So it's like basically like this is acting as a blender pencil. And you do that with the lightest color that you use. You can use white too, but white will lighten it or dull your colors a little bit. So if you want it to be lighter, that's one way to do it. And even just as I put this next layer of the lightest down, it's going to darken up those where it was already, this color was already down. But you're still getting those highlights. I don't know why I didn't color the other side of this out. I want this side to be lighter though. So I'm going to use the medium color on this side, not the darkest color, because I want the shadow on this side so I want that to be the darkest. And then I'm just going to bring those pigments together. And if you lay down too much pigment somewhere, you can again use an eraser to try to bring back some highlights. So if I don't know where I want highlights, but if I wanted to make the center of this, I could erase that center a little bit and then just use a white to blend it out a little bit. So there's ways to repair. All right. Now, if I want to make more shadow, I think this is kind of a light green. I'm going to go with, I'm actually going to use the indigo. Oh, no, that's great. Indigo is one of my favorite colors that I use for lots of things, including shadows. If I want a cool scene, if I'm trying to make a cool color scheme, now red of course is a warm color, but it's in snow, which I think of as more cool, and indigos are really just a really dark blue, and that will work kind of like a dark green on this red, because there is some actual warmth to it. So it's not going to look real purple. It's just going to look like a little shadow over there. You could do this with a dark green too. But since I'm going to be using this for some of the other low lights or shadows, I thought, okay, this will work for both green or red as a shadow color. So to simplify a little bit. Okay. And then for this guy, I'm going to just use this medium red for his feet. And I'm just gonna, instead of using multiple colors, I'm just gonna go over layers and create a gradient with one color. Because each color, you can do a light version of it and a dark version of it. So I could, if I just go really lightly with this color and do one layer, that's one color. And then if I go over, if I press a little bit harder and go over repeatedly, I get a dark color. And then I can even press harder and go over it a number of times and get a really saturated color. So that's just with one color, you can create some contrast. So if you don't have a huge range of colors in your palette, you don't have 3 of every red, you could do it that way. I think it's doing better as far as not going out of focus. I hope I'm right. But when I look up, it looks like it's doing okay. So, okay. Now I think I do want to make these little guys red. You have to be very careful though. I'm going to make him green, this hat green, and I want these red dots on it. But red and green are complementary colors, as I mentioned before. And so if you mix them, they turn gray. They kind of cancel each other out on the color wheel. So when you do put these colors so close to each other, you have to be really careful not to blend them. So if I go over where I've put the red in these scarves, I'm going to get some graying, and I'll demonstrate that in a second here. So you have to just be a little bit more careful if you're going to put them right next to each other. That's all. All right. So I can't just kind of go all over. I have to work around these red berries. So it's really important to have a nice sharp point. I'm going to go ahead and actually I want to demonstrate this because some people get a little confused. This is my little tray that I get crumbs off and kind of my erasing tray. But I recommend that when you're sharpening, that you hold the pencil still and just rotate the sharpener if you're using this type of sharpener. I think the main thing is just to not be trying to move both things at the same time, because these leads are very soft and they do break. That's one of the challenges with these softer, with the softer leads. They're great, they're creamy, they're nice to use, but they can break easily. And sometimes just dropping a pencil, they'll break actually in the barrel. So they might break all the way down to here and then the whole thing will be loose in there. And depending on how they're made, some of them are more hollow, like the lead isn't attached to the wood. And so it breaks and then the whole thing can slide out. And I think there's a way like you can heat up the end and try to fix it that way by heating up the pencil. But the better thing is to not break it in the first place. So just be careful, you know, with, if you have some good, you know, quality pencils, you know, try not to drop them, try not to be rough with them. Don't leave them in a hot car or anything like that. This is really light color, so I'm going to go ahead. I'm not going to use that lightest green because that's pretty light by itself. So I'm going to use, well, maybe I'll use this over here. This looks really, really light. This is the lightest color. I'm just going to put it over on this side. And it may be lighter than I want, but, and I'm just trying to be really careful going around those reds, because I'll show you down here. If I mix these two, see how it just turns kind of gray and muddy. Now in this case, there's not a lot of red down there, so it just is able to go over it. But in this case, there is a lot of red. So you can see it just turns it really muddy color, which you can use, but make sure it's what you want. If you're using it as a shadow, that's great. And that's especially tricky, you know, watercolor too. You have to be really careful when working next to red next to green. And make sure that, you know, one is dry so that you don't pull those colors in and get mud, unless you want mud. This one over here. Oh, that is the dark green. A little extra work to work with that, but look at how great the red pops against the green. So that's the great thing about complementary colors, is they really make each other stand out and pop when they're not mixed, that is. And then for my shadow, again, I'm going to use the Indigo just to get these darkest points. And it just turns it into a dark green, basically, with this light lime color. So, like I said, this works well with both of these colors. But it's not true about all colors with Indigo, but these happen to work pretty well. And then I can soften the edge a little bit if I feel like there's a hard edge, you just soften with the lighter color. All right. Working on the white areas. I just want to make them not seem so stark white. So bringing some gray in. In this case, I'm going to just lay down a little bit of dark. So see, sometimes I use the dark first and sometimes I do the white first, but I'm just going to throw in a little bit of the dark. And then I'm going to blend it in with the light. Just trying to get some texture with the dark. And then using the medium color. Now, you do have to be careful when you're bumping up against other colors, because if I go over that red and go over, it's going to take that pigment in with it. It's going to grab that pigment. So you do have to kind of be careful not to wiggle or see, I just touched a little bit of it and I can see some of that, some of the pink pigment that's just gotten, dragged over there a little bit. So you have to be a little bit, it's okay. Like it's not a big deal, but just be aware, because if it's a color that you really don't want to be mixed with your neighboring color, you just have to be a little bit more cautious when getting close to those edges to not touch it, because they'll just pull it right over. And maybe you want that. Sometimes that's a nice effect to tie in things. You want the neighboring color to blend over, but not always. Now, I feel like I put too much gray in the middle. I want more white there, so I'm just going to lift up some of that white with my and then I'm going to blend with my white just to continue that lightening process. I'm going to keep that, because really that's supposed to be white, not gray. I just got carried away. And then I'm going to use the white to blend out that little gray that I put there. And honestly, I can even use the white here where I already laid down some gray. It'll pull some of that gray over spontaneously. So if that's enough, I don't need to use the gray all the way across. There we go. That better. Now this time I'm intentionally, I'm picking up and then I'm putting down and then making strokes going towards the center, because I don't mind if it pulls out, like some of these little sections I might want it to come out a little bit further than the others. So I'm creating a feathering effect. So you can use the brush stroke, the pencil stroke, to get some you know, textures that you are looking for. Like this moves that pigment over a little bit and I'm following the shape of this item here. I'm coloring. All right. And then I want to do a little bit of gray on his bodies. And since I overdid the gray before, I'm going to just use the medium gray. I'm not going to get the darkest gray over there. Just putting a little bit of some gray there, maybe behind the shadow behind the scarf. Where the scarf's laying, there's a little bit of maybe shadow where it's blocking the light. So I might put a little grays there. And then I want to be really careful about where that goes. So I'm going to use the white to blend that out. I just want it really soft. Controlled. If I want it even softer, that's when I can take my a stump, because I have a little more control with the stump than I do with the, oh no, I spilled my alcohol. So I just basically saturated my stump with a little bit of alcohol. So I'm going to see if I can just get it to move some of that. Soften that pigment. There's not a lot of pigment laying down, so sometimes that makes it not blend as much. It's not. So I'm going to just try to feather it out with the lighter gray. A little bit. Now, if your paper is saturated with the solvent and you use the pencil right away, be aware that it, like, even if it's a water soluble something and the paper is still wet, it'll soften the application on your page. So you might lay down too much pigment without trying. So let me give you an example. If I can, if I have any more there. So if I refill my alcohol thing and hopefully not spill it again. So I only put a little bit in, but let's say that I just did some blending here and the paper still has a lot of alcohol. If I go to put the pencil down, it's going to be more saturated than if I don't have the alcohol, because it's dissolving it as you go. And some people do that technique, but I mean, you don't want to put that much alcohol on the page, but just be aware. So make sure if you're trying to lighten up something, give it a second to dry. And alcohol dries really fast, so it's not usually a problem. All right, let's make a little bit of some shadow on this guy. Underneath his scarf. And then I'm actually going to do a little bit of the indigo here, because there's also the shadow of him. He's in front of this guy. So this is not just indicating that he's got color, but he's white. It's also the shadow. I don't know if that makes sense, but so I want a little bit of blue there. Now I kind of like, use this lightest one. I want to make him seem round. So I'm just going to create these little strokes. I'm going to do that over here too. And they're a little bit of an arc to them because he's rounded. So I'm just trying to create some dimension about his shape, or something. Like I'm telling you part of the story about his shape, and he's kind of roundy. So by doing that, it just helps tell our minds, the viewer, what's going on. And you don't need to tell the whole story, you just need enough of the story. But I just want to kind of indicate some shape there. I don't know if you guys can see, but just a little bit of, just a few strokes going that way. Okay, and then just softening up their little cheekies. And I don't want to darken them, so I'm using the white. But if it gets too light and I decide, oh, I want it, the white darkened it or took too much of the pigment, I can always go over it with the color again. So not all is lost in that case. Okay. All right, so that's, I think, oh, and then we'll just add a little bit of some snowy business. This is the indigo. So I'm just gonna kind of put a little bit of the indigo as a specks in there. Maybe I want to create a little bit of a shadow coming in the front. Snow and shadow. And do some blending pencil. Oh, I want to kind of create a little swirliness like it's snow. So I'm just doing curly strokes, and you can see it actually creates that because this just is moving pigment around physically. So give it that little bit. All right. Okay, so there's the Prismacolors. How are we doing? Oh my gosh, it's 8:10. I think these are just going to be like quick little demos, but they they go longer. Okay. I'm going to show you for the next one a water soluble. So we're going to start with, well, let's just start with these as the watercolor. This is the Faber Castell Albrecht Durer is the series, and these are water soluble. So these are watercolor pencils, and they come in a variety of brands and qualities, just the same as the other ones. And what you'll notice when you first use them is they don't feel as creamy. They don't lay down maybe as smooth as some of the other ones. Initially, relatively speaking, like these are Faber-Castell, but they don't lay down the same as the polychromos, which is also Faber-Castell, or the same as the Prismacolor. So they just feel different laying down. They feel like they're harder lead, and they don't feel as creamy, and they don't blend maybe as well by themselves. But once you add the water, you get this really vibrant color, and it changes the game. So I'm going to grab some colors here. I think I'm going to use this darker screen. I'm going to grab my indigo, because that's how I roll. And then let me get some more good red colors here. Okay, this one looks good. I'm just going to do 2 just to make it go a little faster. And actually, a little goes a long way with these as well. So because the watercolor technique, I don't have to put down as much pigment if I'm going to use that. You can use them like colored pencils, but I think I wouldn't use them unless I was planning to do use the water effect of them, to be honest. So, but laying them down is similar. Depending on the paper too, these can behave different. You're just trying to get pigment down, and you're going to be moving the pigment. So you don't have to worry as much about, unless you're going to leave it dry. You might want to wet some of it and leave some of it dry. So you can just lay down the pigment that you want down. You don't want hard pencil strokes because they may not soften. They may stick. So you still want to have a soft color layer down. Now I'm doing the darker color. And a little goes a long way. So be careful not to put too much down if you want to have a gradient. That's what I tend to do sometimes, is put too much pigment down. And then I have to be careful with the water step, because if you brush the water all over it, you might just get a single color and not really get the gradient you're looking for. So if you got too much pigment, so a little does go a long way. I'm just going to put a light. I'm not being as careful about my brush strokes either, at this point. I can lay it down a little quicker than, a little sloppier. Again, if I think I'm going to not use water on portions of it, I may want to be a little bit neater, but I'm also trying to hurry a little bit. Okay, the darker color, just one on this edge here. Some people will take a brush, and then you can have a wet brush and dip it onto the lead, or you can dip this in water. If I do that, let me just show you that look. If I just dip this in water and make it wet, it's going to lay down the color like really vibrantly. See, look at how much. And I just feel like it's hard to control that. So I don't do it that way, but some people do. You just have to make sure that you dry it afterwards. The other way, like I said, is you can take the wet brush and dip it onto the lead, and then paint with it on. See how bright that gets really quickly? So if you have too much, it's easy to go overboard with it. So it gets really vibrant, and you can see that's just a really pale color. It looks like nothing. You see a lot of white underneath. I'm going to actually use my brushes, because sometimes these aqua brushes, release too much water. And this is such a small project. I don't want so much water. And I'm finding that this one's leaking water too much, more than I want. Like I'm not even squeezing it. And that's maybe what you might find. These are, this one's a pretty low cost point one. I don't know if that's the problem, but I was struggling with that one before. So I decided I'm just going to use a really small round brush because I want more control. And see, it just moves that pigment around and makes it really vibrant. I try to not have too much water on the brush. I don't want to, especially I don't want to warp the paper, but I want enough just to soften that pigment, have control of it, and get it where I want, but I don't want it dripping. So you can get some fun texture, fun watercolor effect. And you know, you can use these with watercolor. So if you're working on a watercolor project and you have a small detail that you really want to have a little more control, you can use a watercolor pencil. I think what I'll do is I'm just going to do one of these guys because of time. And then I will show you another water soluble option. Oops, that's from my other pencils. So you can get just a nice soft effect with, okay, I opened the wrong side of my I just made a mess because I opened the wrong side of my sharpener. So I opened the part that I did that all over myself. Don't do that if you have this sharpener. It is what it is. I just made a mess, but probably needed to be emptied.
Shauna,
Yeah.
once your paper has dried, can you layer another color or more color on top of it with those watercolor pencils and wet it again and spread it, you know, like a glaze of
Yeah.
a different color? Okay, great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll do that. I'll do that. Do that right now. So it's, I mean, even if it's a little bit wet, you could add some more. It's going to lay down a lot faster if it's a little wet, you know, damp still. Let's just say, okay, that was just a little anemic for my red. I want more. There we go. I can just add more.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then let's say now I want to add a little bit of that indigo. So I'm just gonna touch it just a tiny bit because I don't want to overdo it. And then I'm just gonna, now you do have to be careful because depending on the paper you're using, if it gets too wet, it starts to, you know, it starts to break apart the sizing in the paper. And so you can't, you know, if you're not working on watercolor paper, now mixed media is going to work a little bit better than this is not mixed media paper. So I can already tell that I'm starting to get some softening of the fibers. So that's one thing you have to be careful about is with doing layers and wetting and re-wetting. You know, you want to try to get the layers down if possible the first time, but you definitely can. Okay, just to, you know, the paper is going to be more forgiving if it's more durable. This is good paper, but it's just not designed for, it's not designed for water. That's the bottom line. wet medium. It handles it. It handles a little amount, a small amount, but. So I'm just sharpening. This guy was completely flat. Now with these, having the sharp is really only is more important when, you know, especially if you're trying to work in small spaces. But because you're going to be wetting it and moving the particles anyway, it's not quite as important. I'm just, like I said, I'm just getting that pigment down. But again, be careful not to do like really hard strokes, because let me try to show an example. Like these strokes here, I may not be able to have those soften up. They may stay there. So that depends on the paper too. But these ones actually dissolve pretty well. So it depends on the paper, but just be careful with hard strokes. If it has a darker, you know, some of them might do better than others as far as dissolving. Let's see, let's try this one. See, those ones are staying. And if I don't want those strokes to show, then wait, is that even, maybe that's not even the water soluble. Oh no, it's kind of lifting. No, I can't remember. Anyway, just be careful not to do hard strokes, because it may not soften up and you may see those strokes. And if you don't want those there, then just gotta be aware. Just be aware. Here, I don't mind if there's strokes because there's kind of a texture there already. And you're just putting the pigment down where you want it. And you can do a mix of, maybe you want some of them to just be completely dry, you know, and be like more like color pencil texture. Maybe you want that, the white showing through and that texture that you get with pencil on paper. And so you can do a mix where you don't have to blend it all. You know, you can leave some of it pretty solid. And you'll notice with watercolors, and this is different than with the Inktense, I can keep moving it as long as the pigment's not completely embedded in the fiber. I can still come back and activate it and move it a little bit more if I feel like it hasn't been moved enough. And depending on the paper, that, you know, eventually it's gonna not go anywhere. It's gonna kind of get stuck where it's at, but it's always activatable, which is different than the Inktense pencils, which once they dry, they dry more permanent, if you will. Pink. So these are really fun. I mean, you know, they all have their own characteristics, things that they, you know, are good at, things that are their limitations, just like anything. But it's fun if you want to get a nice watercolor look. Okay, now I want to, because I'm running out of time, I want to show the Inktense, which is also water soluble. But like I said, once you've activated it, it becomes more permanent, so it's not gonna keep loosening up. Now, if there's an area that never got wet, that you know, wasn't activated, then it's going to still move. But okay, I have a limited palette on this one. So I'm just gonna, I don't have 3 of every color, but I don't need it because I can use the gradient. But look at how vibrant these ones get. These ones get really vibrant. I can use the feature that, you know, that it's blendable to create my gradient. Indigo, and then I'm gonna have to use, I don't even know if there's a, not a great, let's just use black. Okay. All right, so again, these lay down a little bit different than other pencils. They just feel different, and that's of course the only way you're going to know that is by trying them. They're kind of almost like squeaky on there. They just, and you'll see that these water soluble ones, when they lay down, it's, I don't know if the particles, let's see, I'm trying to get it to, oh, it's not gonna, when I want it to focus, it doesn't. You can see a lot of the tooth underneath. They lay down like, I think the particles are bigger because you're going to be using the water. So they don't, you tend not to get as solid of a covering compared to some of the other ones. So I think that's just because they're designed to be dissolved. So they're not designed to necessarily be dry, even though you can still mix it up. It's just, this is going to look a lot more texture even than the watercolor that I have. There's a lot of white that's showing through.
Shauna, what's the big difference in those pencils and using watercolor pencils?
Well, really the permanence, I mean, they behave pretty much the same as far as I could tell, but the difference is once they dry, once you've activated, these ones are done, you know, like they're fixed. So if you were to drip water on your page or whatever, it's not gonna, you know, it might still activate some areas that haven't been activated if there were some areas that you didn't wet, but it's an ink base as opposed to a watercolor base. So think of
it's
it
more
like,
permanent then, huh?
yeah, so kind of like a marker, like, so it's almost
Okay.
like marker in a pencil.
Okay. All right, thanks.
That's my understanding of them anyway. Somebody knows different. Feel free to say something, but that's my understanding of them. Okay, and so, but as far as application, these maybe don't move as, you know, these I think create a harder edge. They're more vibrant in their color. But I find that kind of trying to blend them out a little bit, sometimes I've found trouble, and I don't know if that's just me. That could be me, my technique. But I feel like you don't have as much mix, you know, playing time because they kind of set. I don't know. I guess it could just be me, but I feel like I get more hard edges, less, like not quite as blending as seamlessly as a watercolor, as my watercolor pencils. Now, my watercolor pencils might act different than your watercolor pencils even, because they all, you know, different brands act differently, but I find that I, you know, see more like distinct stroke lines and things like that. So you have to be a little bit more careful of how you lay it down. See how see all those little brush strokes compared to the watercolor, which is pretty smooth transition, relatively speaking. So that's fun to play with, and that might be what you want. I mean, it's nice texture in there. And again, it could just be maybe my technique. And again, I think you can still lay down, you know, I could still lay down another layer of this if I want, and maybe some of the indigo, not the black. I'm going to go ahead and lay down a little indigo.
Out of those intense pencils.
Yes.
Realized they weren't normal watercolor pencils, and she's found them to be less forgiving, just
Yeah.
like you're explaining now.
Yeah, exactly. Like they just, yeah, they, because of the nature of them being the permanent, they, you know, you can play with them for a little while and then they go, okay, we're done. We're done playing and we're sealed. So I did add some, but it's really grainy. I think part of that's the water, the paper, you know, but it, you know, the watercolor did a lot better when I added more than this one does. See, that one's a lot more just muddy, dirty looking. So I agree. But they're really vibrant colors and they're fun to play with, and you could use that texture if you want that texture in there. You know, those harder lines, you might want it to do that. So play with it if you want to try those out. Okay. And then again, let me just go ahead and do, now I only have the black, so I'm going to see if I can, I just do a little bit of a black on the edge, if that'll be, if it'll let me soften it. It might not, but I don't have gray. I don't have a lighter gray, so I have to go with this. That's just because they have the smallest set. That works pretty well. And again, this might behave differently on different paper too. This paper is not designed for so much water media. So maybe if it was on a watercolor paper, it might move a little bit more. And that doesn't look bad. Do that for the, that's the indigo. Where did my black just go? I like when they have the color on them. Sometimes they just have a number. But it's nice if they have the color, because I can say, oh, that's because this, you know, all of these pencils are the same color on the outside. And then they have the color at the end. But I can't tell if that's indigo or black if I'm looking at them. You know what I mean? So I like it when it adds the name. This has a number and the name, which is handy. So yeah, I don't think they move as far, maybe. I think the pigment's maybe heavier, so it doesn't move as far, if that makes sense. Like I can get more movement with my watercolor ones. All right, so that's a little sampling of that. Let's see, how are we doing on time? Oh, we're 8:35. Okay. I think I've covered all the pencils, and next week I'm gonna, I wanted to do markers, but I was also requested to do to show how I do like faces. So I might work on a face project and then markers next time. And it's similar with markers, but the different markers behave differently. Now this is one I'm working on right now, the color page. This one is with the watercolor pencils.
I mean, they're coloring pages, like she didn't do the thing, but
Yeah, these are just coloring pages, and the paper's not like the best quality, like it's you know, not real thick. So the water with the water medium, it doesn't always, you know, it gets a little crinkled and it doesn't always do what I want it to do. But I want to show you that compared to, this is the Inktense, where I can just see a lot of the strokes, you know, like it doesn't, I can't feather it out as well as I've been able to do with the watercolor. So, but that's also fun. It's, you know, it's fun to have the textures in there. So like I said, it's just preference and practice. So, anyway, I was gonna just demonstrate how to do some, you know, shading to get some contours on the face a little bit next time with a pencil. And then also do some more demos with markers, and I'll use the water soluble markers as well as the alcohol based markers. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Healing Art After Hours. You can download materials related to this topic, including PDF notes of PowerPoint presentations, at creatingspacecoastal.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you found this content helpful, and join me for the next video here at my Creating Space Coastal channel, where I hope to inspire you to create space in your life for fun. Thank you.